Hello and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to go back to the 1950s and we're going to look at an incident in Robeson County, North Carolina that I think many of you probably have never heard of. And it's the Battle of Hayes Pond, where the Lumbee of Robeson County were able to rout the Ku Klux Klan on the night of January 18, 1958.
Yeah, Ray, this is one of those hidden histories that are found here in southeastern North Carolina, and many people might be familiar with where this is taking place. Robeson County, which houses places such as Lumberton and also the University of Pembroke, where I believe you were sharing with me that there's a wonderful museum that might also give our listeners an opportunity to gain more information about the Lumbee tribe as well as other events in the area.
Absolutely. The University of North Carolina, Pembroke, located in Pembroke, North Carolina, which is in Robeson County. They do have the Museum of the Southeast American Indian. They're on campus. It's in the old main building. I don't know what their status is now with COVID-19, but hopefully very soon, thanks to the vaccines and everything, we'll all be able to get back to going to museums and historical events and learning more and more about local history wherever you are. I mean, not just simply, obviously, in North Carolina, but wherever you may be listening, going back to these museums and these historical sites, learning all we can learn about history. And today, of course, what we're going to be talking about, the Battle of Hayes Pond, one of those things that, like I said a few minutes ago, a lot of people know very little about. Of course, if a person's living in southeastern North Carolina, especially in Robeson County, if a person is a Lumbee or related to Lumbee, of course, they probably know a lot about it. But I'm sure there's a lot of people just throughout North Carolina and other parts of the nation that have never heard of what happened there in Maxton, North Carolina on January 18, 1958. So I think Chris and I were talking before we started the program and decided to go back a little bit and talk, of course, about the Lumbee Indians, who they are, their origin, and of course, the origin story of the Lumbee is a difficult story because there's a lot that's unknown.
Yeah, and I think whenever we're looking at talking about a particular event in history, that it is so important that we take time to get to know the players that are involved in the event, because as we start understanding their history, whether it's an individual, whether it's a group, it allows us to put the event in context and allow us to really see, what happened that night? Why was there so much agitation? Why did the KKK decide that was going to be the place where they would hold this rally? Why did the Lumbee tribe believe that they were going to show up and stop this from happening? And I think if you go back in history and you study their history, I think it kind of puts context into why everything came together on that cold night in January. And for the Indians of Robeson County, if you will, you have to kind of go back to the mid 1770s and all the way up until the late 1800s, and we see that they were isolated. They were isolated tribe along the Lumber River, and so after the Civil War, we start to see that North Carolina is starting to divide its citizens into I guess what we could say is a biracial demographic, where you've got white individuals and then persons of color, because everything is starting to split off after the Civil War. And you have Jim Crow that comes in, and you have the public school system, which is making a big part of this that we really don't talk a lot about, how education really kind of pushed even those biracial groups apart from each other. And so now you have this group that is living in this area, the Indians of Robeson County, who are upset because there's a biracial demographic, and they're saying, but we don't fit in either one of those categories. And so the North Carolina General Assembly in the 1880s recognized this Robeson Indians, and but they recognized them by giving them the name Croatans, which Ray, when we're teaching American History 1, we talk about the Croatans, the colonial era Indian community down towards the coast. And they kind of allowed the Croatans, if you will, to start these Indian-only public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we start to see is that there's no longer a biracial, but there's going to be a triracial that happens. And this will basically go up to World War II. And then World War II marks another major change, if you will, in the triracial framework of North Carolina, because Native Americans begin to fight in the war. And I do think it's interesting in World War II, maybe something else we can talk in a later issue, how Native Americans were able to fight alongside of white soldiers, yet African Americans were still segregated in the military at certain points until I think it was Truman who issued his executive order. So after the war, the Indians returned back to Robeson County, and they're more worldly now, and they're ready for political and they're ready for social change, but they're also unhappy because they don't like the name Croatan. And so the North Carolina General Assembly, once again, changes the name to Cherokee Indians, but they don't like that because they feel that that's an inaccurate representation of them. And so we eventually have in 1952, where the General Assembly will change the official name to the Lumbees. And basically that is because of a preacher. It's interesting. We have two preachers in our story today, but a preacher in the early 1950s, Reverend D.F. Lowry, who will organize the Lumbee Brotherhood, basically adopting the name from the Lumber River, saying that this is the river that has helped us have life. This is kind of our central location for our community. And then now that they're called the Lumbee Tribe, you have the General Assembly who supports them and recognizes them. And then I think it was 1955 maybe that the United States Congress passes an act that officially recognizes the Lumbee Indians of Robeson County. But there's a caveat to that. They recognize them as Lumbee Indians of Robeson County, but they do not give them the rights that other citizens in the United States get, or that other Native American tribes have. So you have all of these things that are going on before we even get to the KKK and those issues that are allowing the Lumbee Indians to try to find their place in society, to try to find where they belong in this triracial demographic. I don't know if that's a good explanation of how the Lumbees get there, but I think it kind of leads to how the KKK wind up on that field. And maybe you kind of want to talk about how those parties began to migrate to Maxton on that cold night in January.
Yeah, and it goes back to January 1958. And I do want to say one thing about, you mentioned education and the normal schools and all that. That's actually how UNCP, or the University of North Carolina Pembroke, started. In the 1880s, the Croatan Normal School was established by the legislature there in Robeson County. Of course, that's evolved over the years to become UNCP. But what happened in 1958 was there were two events in Robeson County with the Lumbee that sort of attracted the attention of a guy called James Catfish Cole. And he was a guy living in South Carolina. He was a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan there in South Carolina. But what happened in Robeson County was that you had an Indian family that had moved into a quote unquote white neighborhood. You also had a white lady, I believe it was, who was a white man who was dating an Indian woman. And of course, that angered the white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan and brought in the attention of the Ku Klux Klan. And James Catfish Cole, this guy, starts making noise about coming to Robeson County and having this KKK rally there in Robeson County and bringing his people there. It's interesting that the sheriff of the county at the time, a guy called Malcolm McLeod, actually sent word down to Catfish Cole, don't come here, stay away, don't do this. This is not going to go necessarily how you think it's going to go. You're going to face a lot of opposition. I mean, here you had the Lumbees in Robeson County minding their own business, living their own lives, and now you have these outsiders, these outside troublemakers going to come in and try to create trouble there in Robeson County.
Yeah, and not only are they coming to cause trouble, but they're also bringing that trouble to a very divided area. During the time in the 1950s, there were about 40,000 who were white. There were about 25,000 African American, and you had about 30,000 Native Americans, most of whom were Lumbee. So you are basically coming in to a very volatile situation. And this Reverend Cole, I think we need to make mention that he was a charismatic preacher, if you will, down in South Carolina. But religion, education, all of these things do play a part in kind of how these events unfold. And so here you have this Reverend who is very charismatic, who is very popular, and he decides that he's going to have this rally to take place in Robeson County to express his concern for the injustice of what these Lumbees are doing to the white community, if you will. And he's thinking he's going to have 100, 200, 500, maybe even 1,000 supporters. And it was mentioned that with all the rumors that he's coming to do this rally, that the sales of ammunition and guns skyrocketed in Robeson County, because there was this fear that the Klan and the Lumbees were going to come together, and that there was going to be such a volatile reaction. And to the point that when Cole was trying to find some land to rent for his big rally in Pembroke, nobody wanted to give him the opportunity, right? I mean, so he had to go and find somewhere else, which actually leads to why it's called Hayes Pond. And then he decides to drum up business. He gets in a vehicle, gets one of these megaphones, these loudspeakers, and starts driving down the road saying that there's going to be a rally, that they're going to protest the injustice that is being done to the white individuals. And that caused the Lumbee natives to basically said, when they came through and they started talking on that loudspeaker and they started saying all the things, that's when we knew things had to change. Things had to be different. And so I think the Klan were pretty confident, maybe even a little cocky, because they thought they were going to have a strong show of force. And so they get this huge banner that says KKK on it, and they're parading it, and they're getting out there in their vehicles. And by the way, it is interesting that when the Klan came in their vehicles, that they brought their wives and children also. The wives and children stayed in the car, but they were still there. And I just think that that's once again another sad commentary on kind of the horrendous activities that the Klan did. So now we're at the night, right? We're in January. It's a cold night. So the Klan have been promoting this rally for quite some time. They're pretty cocky. They think they got everything going on. And then what happens? Who shows up?
Well, what happens is the Klan doesn't get near the support that they thought they were going to get. And the Lumbees get a lot of support. By some accounts, there are over 1,000 Lumbee men that show up there, many of them armed, to confront the Ku Klux Klan, who was having this rally out there in that field. Like you said, they had this big banner. They were going to have this huge rally, but they are confronted by a whole very large group of Lumbee men, and possibly, from what I read, African-American men as well, who joined in to confront the Klan there in that field across near Hayes Pond there in Maxton. And what happens there, Chris, when you think about what could have happened there, this thing could have turned into a bloodbath. This thing could have turned into a very nasty scene. But what happens there, in just a few moments, this event unfolds and is over rather quickly. Somebody, apparently one of the Lumbees, shoots out the single light, a light bulb that is burning over, is hanging from a cord or something. And there's shots fired, and the KKK flee the scene almost immediately. I mean, they run from the field because they are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmanned. And in that very quick moment, the Lumbee had done an amazing thing, and that is they had routed the KKK there and stopped what they were trying to do in Robeson County.
Yeah, so it is interesting. Maybe 50 clans show up at the rally. About 400 Lumbee are there.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that looking at the details of the event, that they began the rally, if you will, singing Christian hymns, which
Yes.
once again is another sad state of affairs. But and then, as you mentioned, the light is knocked out, and you have these Lumbees that are rushing forward, and you have the clan that are leaving. By the way, that's why I mentioned earlier about the women and the children in the cars. Mm-hmm. The clan ran and left the women and the children in the cars. I mean, that's just the fear that they had. And we do know that the highway patrol was part of, that were there trying to monitor the situation. You had the Robeson County sheriff deputies that were there. I think there was some tear gas that was used throughout this to try to disperse. And what I found to be very interesting is that there was only one arrest at the scene of the rally, and that was a Klansman who was, I think his name was James G. Martin, and he was a tobacco plant worker, and he was arrested. But what he was arrested for is public intoxication, and that he had a concealed weapon. And so he was the only one that was arrested. Fortunately, nobody was killed in this situation. After the event, the Klan have fled. And so the Lumbees take the loudspeaker, right? The loudspeaker that Cole had used to go back into the town and, begging about the rally. And you've got the Lumbees who take the PA system. They go back to Pembroke. They actually go to the police station and they burn an effigy of Cole. And they're also just celebrating and sharing about what they've done. And I think that this is where the national media comes in and starts actually recording this event in Robeson County, because these two individuals, I don't remember their name, but they were Lumbees. I think one was the son of the mayor of Pembroke. They actually took that captured big KKK banner, and they drive all the way down to Charlotte. They go into one of the largest newspapers in North Carolina, the Charlotte Observer. This is right after the rally. They tell the story, and they are going in and they are wrapped with this flag. So here you have these two Lumbees who are carrying the flag of the KKK, which is the image that people in America will wake up to the next day. So,
and Life magazine gets hold of this thing, the national magazine, and they run, I think it's like 2 articles I read. They run 2 full articles on this event down there in Robeson County.
Yeah, and so Cole, he flees back to South Carolina, and what happened? What does he decide to do?
Well, he's extradited. Did you have something else you wanted to say about him?
Yeah, before he's extradited,
North Carolina.
Yeah, before he actually gets extradited, he actually decides he's going to hold another rally. He thinks that, well, that was just a fluke. I'm going to go back there, hold another rally, and everything's going to be fine. And then, because he's humiliated.
Yeah.
He's humiliated by the whole thing. And he says, I'm going to hold this new rally. It's going to be different. An actual quote from him after this happened, and planning this second rally, he actually says, and I quote, "It will be the greatest rally the Klan has ever had. I expect that more than 5,000 Klansmen will be there, and probably more. Klansmen all over the South are pretty upset," end quote. But he never got the rally. Rather, all he got was his face in the presence of a judge in Robeson County, to which he had fought extradition, but then he decided to go and to have the trial. And he actually blamed the Lumbees. And he actually blamed the Robeson sheriff, who told him don't come in the first place, because he said, well, the sheriff didn't offer adequate protection. And so what we start to see is all of these things that are starting to happen. And, we find that the prosecution in this case, they argue that, really by burning crosses and agitating the Lumbees, do you really think that you are in the right? You caused not that we've heard this recently, an insurrection, or you are causing a riot that actually happened. You are using inflammatory language, which, once again, how important is it to study history and then see how it plays out in real life time? That inflammatory language can cause people to respond and to react. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's interesting that it was a triracial Robeson County jury that does find Catfish Cole and the other guy who's arrested for public intoxication. They find them guilty of inciting a riot, and that Cole is actually sentenced to, I believe it was 18 to 20 months in prison for inciting a riot. So it's fascinating to me, right, that every time we tell a story, that there's somehow that relevance to today comes into the context of it.
Yeah. And, speaking of Cole, Catfish Cole, he's not repentant at all. After he's sentenced, I read a source where it says he told a reporter after all of this is done, and I'm going to quote what he says here, quote, "The action of the court in Robeson County has done more to prove in 3.5 days than I have done by my preaching in 8 years that this county is fast falling into communism and dictatorship," end quote. So, he's not, he doesn't leave the courtroom a repentant, reformed individual. He leaves the courtroom just as defiant, just as I guess you could say belligerent as he went into it, thinking that this whole incident did more to prove his point than it did to disprove his point. But I think most people looking at the situation would see it very differently.
Yeah. And one of the final things that I will mention is the way that the media promoted the story after it happened. This takes place in Robeson County, in a rural county. And, what happens as those guys go down to Charlotte and they share their events of what happened, the way that the media portrays it, once again, brings context to how media portrays things today. Of course, the Lumbees felt that what they were doing was defensive, that they were supporting their home, their community, their group. And, and they were trying to keep this bigotry from coming into their location. And most of the articles that come out about Hayes Pond, you mentioned the Life magazine article, and the media is triumphant about celebrating how the Lumbees humiliated the Klan. And it was evidence that American and Southern attitudes on race were changing, that the Klan was going to be part of America's past.
Yeah.
But if you read those articles, what you'll also see is that they use so many cultural stereotypes with the Lumbees and also with the Klan, and that these stereotypes were actually harmful to the Lumbees, because what it creates is this false assumption of who the Lumbees really were and what the Lumbees were doing and what kind of Americans they were, if you will. And I think there's just another reminder there of the importance of being careful about what you write and not trying to distort the events and not trying to use hyperbole or exaggeration for the events, but rather tell the story as it happens and allow individuals to make their own informed, reasoned opinion as to what happened. And I think we see that this was in the late 1950s. It is very obvious that the Klan and the racial attitudes of the South was not in the past. Right. Rather, it was just being stoked.
Yeah, it was. The Klan didn't really die that night. They didn't go away. They just, I guess you could say one source I read said they learned just to stay out of Indian country. So I think this is a very interesting episode, a very interesting topic, one that I must tell our listeners it was sort of a last minute choice for this episode, but I think it was a very good choice. And there's probably a lot more that we could unpack about this particular event, about the Lumbees, and about the activity of groups like the Klan in the South throughout this particular period. But I hope our listeners enjoyed and learned a lot from the episode that we presented today. Chris, thank you for your research. But anyway, thank you all for listening. Chris, do you have anything else you want to say?
Hey, I really appreciate it. And I want to thank our listeners who are supporting this podcast. We are so thankful for you sharing with us feedback and just taking time to listen. We're just two guys who love history and we love talking about it. And we hope that you will let others know that these podcasts are available. And Ray, you can share with our fine friends the various ways that they can contact us and find out other episodes that we've done in the past.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're available on Sounder. We're available on Google Podcast, and we're also available on Spotify. If you want to contact us with questions, comments, suggestions about future episodes, you can contact us at email, historyyoushouldknow@gmail.com. That's historyyoushouldknow@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And we look forward to talking to you again very soon.